Our first presentation is entitled The Cult of the Commonplace, Late 20th Century Found Object Art in Texas. David McManaway, Jim Love, Roy Fridge, Charles Williams, Roger Winter, and Friends, by Judy Tedford Deaton, Chief Curator and Director of Exhibitions and Collections at the Grace Museum. So Judy is a longtime TACO director and member of our committee. She's the Chief Curator and Director of Exhibitions and Collections at the Grace. She's responsible for the research, concept development, installation, and interpretation of art exhibitions annually, generally about 10. Since 2006, she has been responsible for the oversight of the museum's art and history collections and art exhibitions focusing on historic and contemporary American art and artists working within Texas. Before joining the Grace, Deaton was an associate professor of art history and gallery director at McMurray University. She earned a BA from the University of Texas at Austin and was a recipient of the Southern Methodist University Meadows Artistic Scholarship Award and Graduate Award. Welcome, Judy Deaton.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation to speak about this often misunderstood chapter in Texas art. Found object art, not to be confused with folk art, outsider art, or naive art, was a very sophisticated response by academically trained artists who, along with many other artists in the post-World War II era, absorbed and reinvented new forms for American art, an art world that is still expanding. Found object art can be viewed as a rejection of the abstract expressionist art of, say, Jackson Pollock and others who totally abandon the subject matter in favor of process. Post-abstract expressionist artists, definitely these artists that we're going to talk about today, defiantly retrieved the subject by appropriating identifiable everyday objects into works of art, ripe with social commentary and witty innuendo. Research on this topic grew from a group of exhibitions I curated entitled The Phantasmagoric World of Ordinary Things. The exhibitions featured found object art, assemblage art, and artwork created by Texas artists in the last half of the 20th century. Each artist in this presentation was featured in a long list of important exhibitions during their lifetime and in major art museums across the United States. They also were represented in collections of the Museum of Modern Art, New York, Whitney in New York, and in the Menil Collection, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, Dallas Museum of Art, just to name a few. In fact, an assistant curator from the Whitney Museum recently called me asking about David McManaway and other Texas artists in their collection, saying they really didn't have a lot of information about them. So it was certainly a part of their life, and there is interest on many levels and in many places in this. Many of the artists that you'll see held positions as art professors. They had academic degrees from major institutions while they were creating their own bodies of work. The artists established a resurgence in the interest of the transformative power of appropriation, taking things from your culture, things around you, and combining it in very inventive ways. They supported one another, knew one another, worked together on several different projects, And the idea of a collective is something we really don't think about much today. We think of artists as creative geniuses working alone in the dark, thinking of the next big thing. But truthfully, artists create a great visual memory. They have great value in comrades and people that teach and share and support one another. This group also won many awards, grants, fellowships, and I really don't think we have time in this presentation to go through all of that. So that is not what I'm going to focus on here, although they have wonderful bios. You can look up most of them online. So we're going to focus on several individual artists and their involvement in their world, in the dynamic art world during their lifetime. Most of you are too young to remember the 60s, but it was an interesting, major shift in culture. And it reveals a great deal about the artists when we think of this way. And look at them. What you see behind me is just the last studio wall in David McManaway's studio. So let's look at some other. This may be familiar to some of you. It would be helpful while we talk about this to keep in mind 4 ways of looking at the art of individual artists, their time and place, the group dynamic shared by artists involved in the found object art rebellion in Texas. You can think about context and the dynamics of the American art world in general, because they were certainly aware of that, and relationship to the scene that we see in Texas. We think of these people as maybe Texas artists or Houston artists or Dallas artists or Fort Worth artists, but I think they all knew one another. They saw themselves as artists in their own time and their own place. The exploration of new media was really important during this time, shifting boundaries between traditional and then into experimental art forms that emerged as probably what at the time would be called the avant-garde. They were also, as I just mentioned, very skilled and had great academic training. Most of them started with painting, drawing, and those things, and then advanced in their mind and moved forward into something new and experimental. But you'll find that it may look like it's just stuff, but it is very personal, the way things are placed, how they are put together. It's a very personal story that they're telling you. Friendships and support for individual artists in the rapidly changing art world of the time put them in a conflict between commercial success and freedom of expression. So, I will say, you might find some of this familiar. In 2019, the Curator board held a meeting here at the Woody, and we were given a wonderful tour of the landmark exhibition, Art in Texas 250 Years. And I was so pleased to see that there was found object art included. Notably, this Rauschenberg whistle stop composition, assemblage from 1977, and David McManaway's Jomo board, I believe it's about 1980, mixed media. When we reached the gallery, when we were focusing on the art of the 70s and 80s, we stopped in front of Robert Rauschenberg's whistle stop, and everyone was discussing this important Texas-born artist. David McManaway's Jomo board, you see here, was installed right next to it, right next to the masterpiece by Rauschenberg. I overheard comments about the fact that several people on the tour did not know who McManaway was. And they didn't know what that was. And you can imagine what I said to myself at that point. Both works of art are made from found objects. They're made from appropriation. Rauschenberg also used printed appropriated images. I know you've seen his work with JFK on it, things out of newspapers. Those were appropriated. There's actual screen doors. There's a train signal. So it's printed art, appropriated art, and found objects. Later, I discovered McManaway's response to Rauschenberg, you will see on the lower left, a small 1998 portrait of Rauschenberg fashioned in a coat hanger. I think it's really interesting when you think about, they were certainly aware of one another, and really basically they're doing very, very similar work. Yes, McManaway is connected to the wider art world of the American art scene, and so were all of the artists that I'm going to talk about today. As you see here, this is an important exhibition when many artists, considered local artists, were included in a major exhibition. It was at the Dallas Museum of Contemporary Arts, which was short-lived, but it was very influential when developing an audience in Texas for more contemporary art. Begun by a group of 15 that included artists, architects, theater directors, photographers, and critics, the Dallas Society of Contemporary Arts initially exhibited in the lobby gallery of the Dallas Little Theater. Sculptor Henry Burt Barch taught at the University of Dallas for 20 years, and he established their sculpture department. He served as the director of this beginning group, which in 1957 had attracted the support of such prominent patrons as Edward and Betty Marcus. In 1959, the museum hired a very respected, not from Texas, curator named Douglas McKay, who staged important shows by surrealists Rene Magritte and early pop artist Claude Oldenburg. McKay also organized group exhibitions that included works of art by Texas artists, Jim Love, David McManaway, in the Museum of Modern Art's New York exhibition, Art of Assemblage. It eventually traveled to Dallas in 1961. McKay's wife, Germaine McKay, was a curator of Contemporary Fine Arts Museum in Houston. This is a dynamic duo of people working in Dallas and Houston, husband and wife, that are creating opening new doors for contemporary art in the state of Texas. Over time, the museum evolved into what McKay called an artist's place, where they could meet, talk, work with friends in an artistically stimulating environment. So in April 1963, the boards of both of those museums merged and became the Dallas Museum of Art in Dallas. And pioneering exhibition, you're looking at the cover here, is a relationship between local artists in 1971, One Eye at a Time, organized by McKay. It was held at SMU at the time. It's really interesting if you look at there's McKay. He looks very different. He smoked a pipe. He was very different from his Texas cohorts, but he brought a lot of wonderful new ideas. I had worked with a lot of people to make this happen, and Roger Winter was one of those individuals, and he's probably the last person still alive left from this picture that you're looking here. And we had talked, at least once a week. Wonderful memories about all of this, and he's really excited to share that. If you look at the cover, I had to ask him who all these people were, so I put the names on here so you could see. You can see Charlie Williams is just a circle. That's one of his sculptures. He was out of town the day they shot the film, so he's represented as one of his sculptures up there. But I want you to also notice that Roger Winter did the cover montage. This is pre-computer, okay? And then Roy Fridge was the catalog designer. He did the typeset and layout. Yes, there was a time when people just did typeset, when they did catalogs. And Herb Regala did the catalog production and the printing. So they're all in this. It's working together to make these things happen. Here's another incident that was kind of a landmark, and certainly in Roger Winter's memory. In 1962, the Dallas Museum of Contemporary Art presented Klaus Oldenburg's Engine, and McKay claimed it was the first museum commission happening in the entire United States. In 1962, the exhibition of Oldenburg's store generated a great deal of controversy in Dallas-Fort Worth. He installed his store exhibition, which is basically mundane objects made of plaster in the gallery that looked like a storefront. The work is now considered a prime, it's on all the art history books, a prime example of pop art. Local reactions ranged from minor discomfort to full-blown visceral reaction. And Roger Winters tells this story. Klaus made a slice of meringue pie out of chicken wire and plaster in this exhibit, and he set it on one of Norma and David McManaway's chairs from their house. And when Brow Utter came through, he was so disgusted, he reached down and picked up the pie and took a bite. He was so angry, he was incensed. It was against everything that he felt was important. Oldenburg's installation really blew the top off for a lot of people. But it was what? It was elevating fine, common everyday found art. Things in your life, everybody's life. He created something that simulated it and asked everybody to respond. And I think Roger Winter thought Brow Utter's response was one of the best art responses he had ever seen. Anyway, Roger Winter has vivid memories, too, of 1961. You can see the piece of the catalog here. It was a grief show that in about the same time, so this is 1961, that brought Robert Rauschenberg, Roy Lichtenstein, Robert Motherwell, James Rosencrantz, Joseph Albers, Morris Lewis, Jasper Johns, Jim Dine, and Richard Diebenkorn to the Dallas Museum of Contemporary Art. The people we're going to talk about today were involved in the installation, worked with the artists, through all of that. This is another exhibit that kind of changed as a watershed moment. And this is called The Art That Broke the Looking Glass. I don't know if anybody has a copy of this. It's really interesting. It's not like any art catalog you would ever find. What McKeague was trying to do was educate the Dallas or the Texas crowd about contemporary art and art history, and I think it was a little too scholarly for most people. But I would like to note that the cover design that you're looking here was created by Roy Fridge. He created kind of this surrealist group of things together, had someone photograph it. So I think it's important to look at this because not think about these artists as just somehow working in a vacuum. They had great exposure, they understood what was happening in the larger art world, and they made decisions to whether to participate in it or not. So Fridge loved McManaway, Roger Winter, and Charles C. Williams were all involved in the influx of experimental art and artists that would write the next chapters in American art. This was not always popular. Fridge, Love, and McManaway that you see here became part of what was considered an irreverent avant-garde art scene, and they were labeled the unholy trio. The demo collected the exhibition featured objects, all sorts of interesting objects by these artists. Much of the Jomo Collective, and we'll talk about that, exhibition that I worked on was created in response to their relationships and their relationships with other artists. Much of the Jomo Collective they gave to one another. They made art, obviously, that was exhibited and sometimes in the same media, but these are gifts and puns and inside jokes that they played on one another. That's a really interesting chapter. But I love the photo. They're inviting you all to come and learn about them. This is the cover from the Jomo Collective. This is a little book that was found in McManaway's thing. If you opened it, there were little drawings and little ephemera all stuck inside of it. And I like the chicken, the portrait of a chicken here, because it tells you back exactly how to make a Jomo, if you want to. Where that all came from, in 1954, at the University of Arkansas, McManaway said, I met another art student named Harold Hill, who had also seen a 1939 Jute Girl film and remembered the prankster in it. The guy popped in the scene, and he said, bye, Jomo, and it was like a lucky charm. It's kind of the opposite of mojo, What is Jomo? And it was in that movie, and they thought it was funny. And so they started this whole thing. We made things, we found things, we combined things, we packaged things, we placed things, we mailed things, we put things on wheels. We doctored photographs, built statues that dropped their pants, tied rooms full of strings, sent and left Jomos to surprise the intended victim, creating an elaborate inside joke. So eventually, Jomo became a word in their vocabulary, and it became, what you're seeing here on the left is one of Harold Hill's original Jomo boxes. We could hardly get it open, and I had to keep it covered up. It was very odd. But anyway, that was the kind of things that they would make and put together and collect. And it was really interesting. It's hard to find anything about Harold Hill now. I don't know if he continued his art career, but we found this box from the 1950s that he had traded off with McManaway. So now let's talk a little bit about some artists involved in this group, some people you may be more familiar with. Roy Fridge, what a master of wood. The piece you're seeing here, big, boring, ball bearing, but it is ball bearing, not ball bearing, that's what he called it. Torque tickler, a carved wood from 1966. When you turn the crank on one side, the whole thing moves. It's just articulated. It's a pun. He worked in Port Aransas, Texas. He was known for his symbolic assemblages. After serving in World War II, graduated from Baylor University in Waco with a degree in filmmaking. He built boats. Some were functional, some were almost elusive, mythic ships of wood, bone in small, intimate scale, and wood in large, gigantic. He also constructed life-size shrines in woods in Coletta Creek near Victoria. He made these shrines for a photographic narrative that he wrote about called Shamans. He kept intense journals. His photographic narratives and journals together have been shown in exhibits, rarely, but this is his personal dialogue. So you can say, this goes internal. Maybe, yes, exhibited, and he certainly did exhibit. He did a great many things in the art world, but this is kind of a behind-the-scenes look of other things that he did. Next up on the list here is Jim Love. As shy as his humor is wry, Love emerged in the early 1950s as one of the modernist rebels. He said he got into art coming in sideways. He was born in Amarillo in 1927. He earned a bachelor's degree in business from Baylor University, and eventually ended up in set design. And he worked at Paul Baker's Avant-Garde Theater in Dallas until 1953, and then the Alley Theater brought him to Houston as the lighting director. 3 years later, he was hired by the Contemporary Art Association in Houston, and he got his first opportunity, and the way he put it, I got to exhibit my put-togethers, and that's what he did. Those were some of his first assemblages that were put on view. Love's early works were made from objects found from scrap heaps. He welded, transformed things, making fanciful birds, flowers, and creatures of all types. There are several people, Roy Fridge said that Jim and I were friends for 53 years. We found objects, we scavenged beaches in Port Aransas. We dug piles of scrap out of Fort Worth and Waco. It was magic. This is a few other pieces by Love. He was known for his whimsical titles. Do you see one up there? Mother-in-law. And then the dumb duck. There were a lot of these things. They are really amazing. They're beautifully made, but they are things that he found and transformed into a visual pun. He moved to Houston in 1953 and worked for many institutions, choosing the Alley Theater, the Grand Opera. In 1956, Jermaine McKagy, the Houston side of the McKagy family, asked him to be a museum technician. And so he worked there as a museum technician. He is closely associated with John and Dominique DeMille and in their institutions for almost 50 years. They have a wonderful collection of his work. He's known for his outdoor sculpture all over the U.S., and it is a long list of things that you would probably see but not associate with this work. Another person that you may not know anything about is Sam Gulmuth, as it's a national sensation in the 1960s because he was like Texas' response to minimalism. So think Donald Judd minimalism. You don't see any mark of the artist, any hand of the artist. But Gulmuth was certainly a major influence on artists. He, like Dan Rizzi and David Bates, who credits him with a lot of inspiration. He was great friends with McManaway, Bill Commodore, and other celebrated artists of his generations. He spent hours in Tremont or Munger Place group of artists that all moved in together and lived in bungalows, Munger Place. I met him recently before he passed at Barry Whistler Gallery in 2018. Fascinating person to talk to. Fascinating history of his life in the arts and how he took minimalism and added a personal touch to it. There's little nails left in things, there's rough surfaces. His grids are not all completely geometric. But he has his own version of that. Really interesting person. If you don't know about his art, you might look it up. The next person involved in this group is Jack Boynton. The thing in the top that looks like a box, the title of that is called Captive Audience. And it was a gift, I believe, to Charles Williams. Yes, it was a gift. This was JOMO given to him. And that's supposed to be Love, McManaway, and I'm not sure who the third person is. But it's three people in their group. If you could look at those faces and figure out who's who, I'd appreciate that. But it comes in a box, and you open it up, and there they are, and it's called Captive Audience. So really fascinating. But he's also known for the type of painting that you see here very early. He had garnered national attention in the 50s, 60s for his modernist, largely abstract painting. And Museum of Fine Arts Houston curator Allison DeLee McGreen described his landscapes as introspective, visionary landscapes. So do you think the same artist did the visionary landscape that did the box, that did the prints? These are multifaceted creative people with a great high level of skill in many different areas. So it's fascinating to think about. I think it's important not to think of them as one-hit wonders. They did just one thing. They lived in just one place. Just one short description, because it's much more complex than that. Charles T. Williams, I understand that Carl is here. You want to raise your hand? The son of Charles T. Williams. If you have questions, he's the guy to ask, okay? 1953 sculpture composition that you see here. Look at all the things you're looking at here. The one with the cowboy, I believe, was recently at the Whitty, and it's been in so many exhibitions. Really amazing artist. Charles Williams was described as an avant-garde existentialist from rural Texas who was a charismatic mix of beatnik and disciplined artist. That's quite a comment. He brought European modernism with him from Europe after World War II to Fort Worth. His studio became a mid-century salon. Most recently, Charles Truett Williams, The Art of the Scene at the Amon Carter. I do hope you went to see it. The catalog is online. You should read the essays. They're amazing. Really well done. Yeah, people are smiling. They were there, okay? The mid-century art scene through the presentation of more than 30 works by Williams and his artistic community in which he worked. Charles Truett Williams was a key figure in bringing the JOMO collective together. Jim Love knew him first, brought Roy Fridge and David McManaway to his Fort Worth studio in 1960. The same year, Williams introduced them to Roger Winter. Roger Winter tells many stories about experiences and things that happened there. They're very long and funny, and I don't have time to tell you all of them, but if we have a cocktail later, I'd be glad to share. Roger Winter. The one in the middle is a wonderful painting, "Oh, Didn't He Ramble," in memory of David McManaway, and the year of his death in 2010, and we were able to get that for the exhibition. Roger is a significant figure in Texas art history, a painter of profound sensitivity. Winter grew up poor in the outskirts of Denison and during the Great Depression. He attended UT briefly. He's got a really good resume. If you want to read about all the things that he did. He quickly discovered when he came to Dallas the bohemian, art-hungry community of Friends of Munger Place, led by McManaway on Old Lawn. Museum director Douglas McKagan was there. Winter, as the last surviving artist of that era, of the One Eye at a Time group, and it's just wonderful to talk to him and share memory, and he shares memories about this. Susie Khalil introduces Winter in her book, The Art of Roger Winter, Fire and Ice, and I know that Roger was here and Susie was here to talk about that book when it was released at Casetta Symposium. She introduces him as a die-hard romantic whose reflection on the passage of time conveys a bittersweet awareness of fragility of beauty. I asked Winter about that, and he said, well, I think it's really all about empathy, about understanding people, about empathy. He's won many scholarships. He's in New York now. He didn't stay in Texas forever like we hoped he would, but his heart is still here, and he shares great memories about his time in Texas with these people. Another artist that was part of this group was Bill Commodore. A Dallas painter, SMU professor Bill Commodore was born in Athens, Greece in 1932, moved to the United States and received formal education at Tulane, and he worked in New York. Some of his teachers were Mark Rothko and David Smith. He gained popularity in the 1960s for pop art. He continued to change through his entire career, doing quite a few different styles and mediums. Dan Rizzi, if you know Dan Rizzi, the artist, although Bill was never officially a professor of mine, I certainly felt like he was. I got my MFA from SMU in the early 70s, and I met Bill through Roger Winter and David McManaway. So they were help supporting young artists come up, and their influence is a great amount of, there are a lot of people who want to talk to you about how they knew these people and what they did for them and what their teachers taught them. Another artist in this group is Herb Regala. He had one little picture on that One Out of Time catalog. Herb grew up in Denver, Colorado. And after the war, he moved to Amarillo, Texas, where he learned commercial art. And we were just talking about people that did whatever they could, commercial or whatever, to pay the bills. He credits people from the Dallas Museum of Art and SMU, years at SMU, of his work with Jerry Bywaters, Otis Dozier, Octavio Medlin, and all those early teachers who became his close friends and supporter during his career. So friendships grew with fellow artists, Roger Winter, David McManaway, Bill Commodore. And there are lots of stories about other things that they did too that are really quite extraordinary. He was certainly an experimenter. So here's another twist on this. He was intriguing experimentation with plastics, polyresin, PVC pipe, plexiglass, aluminum, new materials, things people never counted as art before. He was part of that group who wanted to experiment with those things. And speaking of artists working in different media, Hal Pauley came to Dallas as a weaver, and these are examples of two of his weavings. This is the front and the back of something. They're really hard to find, really beautiful and experimental. He was also a wizard technician at the Dallas Museum of Contemporary Art, where he worked with Love McManaway. I just should say the Crazy Bunch, all those guys. They all worked together. He was a part of the catalog of that exhibition, One Eye at a Time, that gave Texas artists an exhibit, and some credibility. And his wife, Jet, was a very interesting person. She was part of the social collective and was very supportive of the group. So he eventually resumed painting and returned to New York, where he experimented with extruded mylar, which you see up above. We'll get to David McManaway. He was from Chicago. He went to school there, graduated, moved to Dallas, and he promised he would never go to New York. And he didn't. He said he would never do that. Everybody else seemed to leave town, go to New York to make the big time. But he said he had a nest, and he had friends, and he wanted to stay there. He was a painter in his early years and later abandoned painting to create assemblages. This is a picture of him from a show he had in 1975 at the DMA, where they recreated his studio, because he had already gone from painting into found object art, and people thought it was really fascinating. Roger Winter says, as an adult, he struggled between the idea of doing serious painting and serious art and then doing what he really wanted to do. So he made that decision, and he called them JOMO boards, and that's a big switch from one thing to the other. These are two paintings, two works of art, two self-portraits by McManaway, 39 years apart. 1965, all on canvas self-portrait, and Private World, 2011 mixed media assemblage. If you look closely, the figure laying down is McManaway. The guy at the bottom is a picture of McManaway. There's a little baby inside the guy laying down, and those are all McManaway. So it is a self-portrait, but look at what he has created. He traded the brush strokes for objects, and he said this in a KERA interview with Quinn Matthews, who also photographed his studio and did a great video, and you can probably find that online. The art process, or what I know about making art, and this is McManaway speaking, comes out of painting and drawing. And the collage assemblages use the same basic concept. I complete the backgrounds, and then I surround that with objects in exactly the same way that I would paint something. So that's a different way to think about it. Throughout his successful career, constructed large 3D assemblage art, continued to draw cartoons, make JOMOs for his friends, entertain people in his home on Munger Place. I guess he really found his nest. I want to talk of someone who's usually left out of this conversation, Norma McManaway. Norma Shea McManaway, when she married David McManaway, they filled their home with art, found objects, cats, dogs, and friends. It was the place to be. She was born in Missouri in 1926. Norma attended Northwestern State University. Later in New York City, she worked in advertising and developed a talent for banking and bookkeeping. While living in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, she opened a storefront gallery, and in walked David McManaway. They moved to Dallas. They were married in 1959, and Norma was an important part of the JOMO Collective, not just as the hostess, but as an artist in her own right. Evidence suggests that several of the members of the collective were in love with Norma. Anyway, Roy Fridge's portrait of Norma, 1960. You see it? It's a metal and wood. It's like a little shrine to her. David McManaway's drawing over here, it says, "Her magic is kept inside." That's one of her little ceramic cats. Also, all of them relied on her bookkeeping, balancing the book skills for all of them while they're all out having fun doing other things. Obviously, Norma's story was too important for me to leave out of this exhibition. So through her estate, and she didn't know about it because she was ill and in a facility at the time, I brought them out. So I found her drawings, some of her ceramics, and I included them in the show. Roy Fridge made her a cat mask. I don't know if you can see it on the wall. She loved cats. Cats are a major subject in her art. And then the one we just saw of the shrine that he made for her. Bill Commodore did the painting of her. that you see there on the wall. I'll read you a letter from Jim Love. Dear Norma, 1995. I don't know what made you stop doing the clay the last time. Please don't stop anymore. The things you make have too much prospect for spreading joy and delight. And to leave them unmade is such a terrible thing. I've been wanting to say this to you for a long time. So there, Jim Love. Obviously, you're an important person. Another thing about her you might not know, she was a founding member of the D.W. Co-op Gallery, and that's another chapter in Texas art history you need to look up. This is a group of women artists that got together and opened their own gallery, only showed women artists in 1975. Eventually, the gallery closed in 1988 and went through several different forms. They were all volunteers. You can see Lillian Glatt's name up there. Maybe some of the artists, you ought to look this up. Many of them were very, very successful, and they formed their own co-op. Eventually, they changed the name to DW Gallery and let the guys do some stuff over there. And they had David Bates, Clyde McConnell, and young up-and-coming artists. And they had a great reputation for supporting other artists and for showing art by women artists. I love the photo. I think it's great. All right. The art scene. And I borrowed the title from the Amon Carter and stuck it up here. Charles Williams himself was the catalyst, and this is where they all congregated. The social scene, according to Roger Winter. The list of studio visitors reads like a who's who in the regional art scene. Jack Boynton, David Brownlow, Kelly Faring, Roy Fritsch, Jim Love, David McManaway, Gene Owens, Dixon and Flora Rita, Evelyn Sellers, Ed Storms, McKee Trotter, Roy Utter, and Donald Vogel. Also Jerry Bywaters, curators for many museums, and Neiman Marcus President Stanley Marcus championed a lot of them and came to the parties. Ted and Lucille Werner were there. The Werner Collection's great Fort Worth story, if you don't know about that. Buckminster Fuller stopped by, so did Klaus Oldenburg after his shameful exhibit. And Azama Noguchi. What a mix. Wouldn't you like to have been there? That's just an amazing story. Dave, Norma, and this is what Roy Fritsch said. Dave, Norma, and I met Roger and Jeanette Winter at a delicious steak dinner and with Beaujolais at Charlie's. In addition to the meal, I remember that when Roger and Jeanette Winter said goodnight, Roger opened the door and walked right into the closet. Roger Winter said, I've never known anybody who was a more perfect host than Charlie Williams. There's another art scene, the art scene on Munger Place. And this was hosted most of the time by David and Norma McManaway that we've already started talking about. They purchased the Tremont House in Munger Place, which is, I don't know if that was redone or if it's still there. But the neighborhood fellow artists that lived there were Roy Fritsch, Herb Regala, Roger Winter, and Bill Commodore moved into these affordable little bungalows. They could all live there. It was a great art scene for the time. Some people call them the Oak Lawn Gang. They all met, they had parties, they played games, they wore hats, they had who could wear the craziest hat, costumes, and you can see the invitations were all hand-done by Norma or David, and they would pass them out and leave them in people's mailboxes. Christmas was a big deal. I think it was Norma's birthday. But there's a whole box full of these wonderful little invitations and mementos. Blue Hat is the game they played about who showed up with the best, craziest hat. So that's what the other piece is about. And there's a picture of the house. This is what was upstairs. In 2014, at the 9th Annual Cassetta Symposium in Fort Worth Community Arts Center, I met Robin Reagan, David McManaway's longtime studio assistant, who was in the process of dismantling this and taking care of Norma and handling their estate. As I was leaving, she asked if I'd like to see the McManaway house and studio before it was dismantled. I can never resist. the chance to see an artist studio. So it was a very hot day. There was no AC, no AC in the house. It was a mess. I had heard that the studio was something you had to experience, and that people had been there, couldn't believe it. Like I said, Quinn Matthews did a video to try to tell you what it was like to go up the stairs and walk into this. I can only describe my visit to McManaway studio as akin to stepping into one of his works of art. Walls, ceiling, tabletops covered with selected and carefully placed objects waiting for a chance to be fine art. If you ever get a chance to look at the film, you'll get a sense of what that was like. Here's him working in that studio, and it looks like chaos, but according to Robert, he knew where everything was, and he moved it around all the time. So the whole place was like a work in progress, and he knew where he would find that little green frog that he wanted to put over here. He knew exactly where it was, according to her. She was probably the person who had to take care of all that. Here is McManaway. He received his degree from the University of Arkansas. Today, McManaway is best known for what he called his large-size JOMO boards, composition of juxtaposition objects, such as plastic toys, stuffed animals, trash, and other commonplace objects. I challenge you, when you see one of these, to look closely, and you will see that McManaway altered and manipulated every little object in it in order to generate another level of meaning through where the placement is. There are juxtapositions. This is by this for a reason, resulting in kind of clever double entendres and humorous contemporary comments about what he thought was the crazy life we live in. This is before we had cell phones. He had kept address books, old telephones, ledgers, all kinds of things. He doodled all over everything, but he always had a wry comment about how something wasn't good enough or wasn't what he expected. The mass-produced, proudly useless cultural discards stand as markers of memory for him, and for most of us who look at it, transformed into the artist's private response to the absurdities, and it also confronts our longing for the familiar, all there in one piece. He had considerable knowledge of art history, art theory, but he salvaged, collected, and retrofitted thousands of found objects into complex designs long before recycling was a thing. In essence, he mined his own world to compose a private mythology that continues to resonate as a memory triggers for all of us who lived through that. It's very kind of profound statements. It's kind of like a set of private mythology. I'm going to show you one more slide here. These are two of his pieces, one from 1983 that I borrowed from David Gibson. He has a fabulous collection of McManaway work. And most of the people who lend the objects are worried about how stable they are. And it's not because of the way McManaway put them together. It's because the tiny little things on there weren't meant to last forever. So little tea bags will just disintegrate after a while. So very often in the bottom of the things that are encased, like in this piece, I think you can see a few little things that have fallen off. So McManaway would say that's just the way it's supposed to be. Nothing is forever. I will say this. This is Tony's Cross, the mixed media assemblage. It's stunning. This one has a number. Not all of them have things on the back. Number 13 from 1986. And he also did these small things that you're seeing here, little sculptures. So it's quite a variety. Heritage Auction has a David McManaway JOMO board for sale. Came from a private collection. Never been on the market. I shouldn't say this, I guess. But if you're interested in that, you ought to go talk to Allie, because she's waving her arms back there. I saw it at the Texas Art Fair and I went, oh my gosh, this is great. Yeah, they're really amazing cultural objects from the time period. This is a manifesto by McManaway. The items, this is what he called items to add to the list of survival activities discussed in the worst-case scenario handbook. Don't tell anybody you're an artist. Rid yourself of all hope of ever becoming famous. Marry someone with an income. Do everything to avoid teaching. Don't make artist statements. Don't go to openings. Do not cotton to admirers, especially if they're young and real pretty. You know, I think he meant just the opposite, but it really all makes us smile when we think about it. I wanted to give some credit to David Gibson for his tour de force of documenting the studio over 18 years. David McManaway's exhibit at the Francis Chandler Gallery in 1964 was the first time Gibson met McManaway and saw his work. He liked the paintings, but he was really excited about the Jomos. He thought they were awesome. So he collected them. He's got some of the best ones. In his visits to the studio of arranged objects, he just became entranced by the studio. He saw his studio like he did the Jomo boards. So the long friendship followed. And in 1993, Gibson began the project of documenting McManaway's extraordinary studio evolution over 18 years. Every time he went to photograph, it was different. It wasn't static. And as you can see from these photographs, this is from that series, you can see how he focused in on Mickey Mouse. You can know we had that in the exhibit, it was awesome. And you could see all of the things in the studio, but he would take these moments of composed, what he called genius, in the studio, and that's what he photographed. It's an amazing collection, and it was great to work for him to bring all of those photographs out for people to see and get some kind of sense of that. Really, the documentation of the McManaway studio and artwork was a great contribution to the exhibition, and ongoing conversation focusing on the art of David McManaway and found object art, which is really, I hope you will come away from this thinking that it's a major chapter in Texas art. Here's one of Gibson's color photos of the studio. If you're like me, I want to step in there and look at all that. I just want to conclude by saying thank you to everyone who helped me work on this project over many years. Roger Winter, David Gibson, Robin Reagan, who's very ill right now, and we may lose her, but she had the best information. Tom Motley, David Snow, Betty Moody, George and Beverly Palmer, Mark and Geraldine Kiever, Quinn Matthews, the Grace Curator staff, as well as Cassetta and Carl Williams, sitting right back there. Because Cassetta is a group of people who are willing to share and support Texas artists and support these stories. And I think that's one of the things that's really been amazing. I've been coming to these meetings forever. And I always meet someone new and interesting and make a connection that has, will have a really interesting outcome in the future. So thank you for your time, and take a look at mid-century found object art.